there's play, there's performance that comes to play. And I know sometimes we're too nostalgic about the olden days, but when you think about what isn't there, when I look at my 5-year-old nephew who, you know, is more likely to sit in front of a screen than we would have had the opportunity to. I do think there is something that they lose out on play, because play is the foundation. Play is at the heart of expression. I was in Barcelona for about a week, then in Joburg for 2 or 3 days because I had a whole lot of press to do. And then I'm in Cape Town now. So we have a show tonight. And it's so I'm performing. I'm backstage.
Wonderful. Where?
Here at the Artscape. So it's like an awards evening thing.
Artscape, okay. Lovely.
Yeah. So I was like, please, I need my own dressing room. I can't share because I have conversation from all time. So occasionally you may hear people just running up and down. You may hear a little 13, 12,
That's
11
cool. Wow.
dancing.
It's like sound effects. It's great.
So adding a little ambiance to our background.
That's great. That's awesome. Okay. When do you start?
So 6:30. Yeah. But
Okay.
I've already
All
done my run through, my sound check and so on.
Okay. You're
So
happy with, okay.
getting into costume and all of that stuff.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad you could make some time for a matinee. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I'm good. It's great to have you on. I want to go into an introduction about what you do and who you are, and I'm happy to say that you're the first poet on the Humble Mind podcast, which is awesome. Definitely not the last. But I know that when we talk about everything that you're doing, it will come out, everything that that you're up to, and people get to know you. But I want to start off with a quick memory I want to share with you, actually, because you are you're someone who I met when I was at university. You were also, I think you were completing your master's back in the good old days of University of Cape Town, student days.
Yeah.
That was almost 16 years ago for me, and you were my first year English literature tutor. I just have such a fondness of, getting to university from scootering there and, kind of coming out, walking around those beautiful buildings on an overcast sky with nothing but a poem in my head and some music in my ears, and just such a great warm
walls. Yeah,
exactly, all of that, and such a wonderful warm sort of nostalgia that I still feel for that, a less complex version of me. And so I want to express some gratitude for being part of it, being a small part of it, because that's something I carry around fondly.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Those were good times.
Yeah, those were good times. Yeah. And now what's amazing about it is that we get to reunite and talk a bit more about your life, because you have a life that works with words, which is incredible. Yeah.
I mean, it's actually interesting because when I was in second year, I don't know if you remember Professor Carol Clarkson.
I do.
I don't know if
she used to draw. Yeah.
Yeah. So she was, I think when I was in second year, she said to me, have you considered the academic path of can an artist make a living? Right? Because that was a question of what does it mean to be an artist? And I'd already failed first year because I was registered for biotechnology. And that was only because it was the one thing my parents were willing to let me do. And I had English as a minor. Of course, I failed part of it from not attending classes, but, we won't tell them that. And then in that second year, I think it was after a seminar when she asked me that question, that kind of set me on a very specific path where I thought, okay, there's something that's akin to what I actually want to be doing, but it feels like, it's sort of close enough. But ironically, when I was doing my master's, so this is now around the time we would have known each other, I was talking to her and I was speaking about this kind of tension I was feeling where as a because I was also doing drama and I was performing on the side as well. And I remember saying, I'm struggling to bring those two selves into my academic writing. I'm struggling to feel like there's a place for the performer, there's a place for all of this beautiful world that's happening here, and what's happening, what is expected of me on the page, what is expected of me as a sort of scholar in training or young researcher and so on. And she said something that I think actually probably set me on the path out of academia. And where she said, no, but you need to bring both those selves in. That academia at least shouldn't be a place where you feel as if you can't bring all of the other things that you have with you. Especially, as a master's student, you're being taught how to become a researcher. It's quite rigid, but I couldn't. I don't know. It didn't work as well as I'd hoped. And then I also realized I was like, maybe I actually want to go into practice. There's a number of other steps from that conversation to there, but there was a sense of I want to go into practice, and then maybe once I have a compelling enough question, I might come back. But I'm still out here enjoying practice.
Wonderful, yeah, absolutely. And I love how you phrase that, and the fact that it is a tension, and I think it's an existential tension around academia as well, because it's always about how does academia cross the placenta? How does it get through to the other side where the research and the time and the ability to really kind of brainify things have the real world purpose and value, and as if it was possible to do it any other way, but in putting those two halves together, of course, so it's a great way to see it, and poetry is your stock and trade in particular. I mean, there's writing, there's performing, there's a whole lot of that which I want to explore and hear. And I don't know if you feel up to maybe reciting a piece or two. It would be amazing.
I'll read something, yeah.
Yeah, because there's a performance part of what you do as well. It's not just a writer, right? There's something to be performed, to be expressed.
Absolutely.
Where does that come from for you?
Oh, goodness. Probably, there's, I'm thinking about childhood. It's hard to have this particular conversation and not go back to childhood. And that involves sort of empty roll-on bottles or a brush or a comb pretending to be a microphone in front of the mirror. So I think there's probably from childhood, there is that mirroring that happens, right? So you watch someone that you admire on television. I remember someone like Felicia Mbusa.
Oh, yeah. Remember her.
She was so pivotal for the role of media in South Africa's transition, because it was this place of conversation. I think she was one of the first shows that actually had people from all races, from all demographics, from all backgrounds,
South African
being
Oprah.
in a space together and having,
Yep.
yeah. But I think it was a little bit more interesting what she was doing, because it was this political moment where there hadn't really been a space for people across the racial divide, across class and with different backgrounds to have conversations. And I remember some of them would get quite heated because South Africa obviously had not been able to, because of the division of apartheid. So watching her on screen, obviously there was the representation element, but it was what she was able to do in bringing people together, and just a truly fabulous human. And so I just remember emulating that kind of thing in front of the mirror. And then I think of sort of primary school and preschool. I was in plays. I was a drama kid through and through.
Yeah, same.
So performance has always been there, and I think also encouraged at home. There's performance that comes to play. And I know sometimes we're too nostalgic about the olden days, but when you think about what isn't there, when I look at my 5-year-old nephew who, is more likely to sit in front of a screen than we would have had the opportunity to. I do think there is something that they lose out on play, because play is the foundation of what I do as a creative performance, whether it's in writing, whether I'm in front or behind of a camera. But I think play is at the heart of expression. Yeah, sure. So I'd say, performance has been with me, honestly, obviously before writing, but storytelling is an important part of my family life and my upbringing.
Humble Mind is a podcast that has a pretty big non-South African audience. So for you and me, and when I was reading a bit about your background and what's said, there's the mention of the Afrikaans dorpie, right? And a dorpie is a small town. So just sketch for me quickly what that background, what that small town looked like, what it smelt like, and what it meant for you, just as a like a poetry of place for you, and how that has clearly influenced you as well. So we're talking South Africa in the late 80s, early 90s. Okay, maybe I wasn't conscious enough in the late 80s because I was only born in 86. But certainly
I was born just after the emergency state of emergency period. So I think that was 85 when South Africa was in a state of emergency, right? So you can imagine that kind of lockdown. And then I had this interesting background because my father was a policeman. And as a Black policeman, it wasn't actually safe to live in the township. So the Black policemen lived in police barracks, which was sort of a fenced-off area that had about 4 or 5 four-room houses. And interestingly, the geography of where I grew up is, it feels like really mimetic in terms of my entire human experience, because Stacksroom was divided according to racial lines. So the township, there were a lot of surrounding farm areas, right? So a lot of farms in surrounding areas. And then you had the Black area. There was this river. I believe it's part of is it the Hex River? Yeah. But it's one of the really, yes. So, but it was pretty much dry almost all year round. So there's this, so it felt more like a canyon than a river, right? Because you could, when it was dry, you could actually walk, but there were 2 main bridges across. And then, so that was the Black area. Then you'd have the bridge, rather the river. And then just on the edge of the river was the colored area. And then where town would be the white area. And there was one tar road, right? One tarred road. And so everything else was dusty. And the police barracks was actually on the other side of the river between all of these places. So just when you leave the Black area towards the police station, towards the colored and white area. So when I speak about in-betweenness, I experience the geography. I experienced it within the geography. And then I had the experience of spending my preschool or kindergarten and first, probably, I'm not sure how many months of what would be first grade, which at the time was sub-A, in a Black school. And then around 92, when they said, okay, Black and colored kids can actually go to former white schools, then I was taken there. And then they had this thing of, if you came from a Black or a colored school, you'd be taken a year back. This was a small school that had about 65 children. And I was one of the first Black kids there. 65 children where you have multiple classes in the same classroom. Right? So you'd have like sub A, sub B, standard 1 in the same class. And the teacher is trying to navigate teaching all of these different classes. Yeah. On top of that, two of us were English students in an Afrikaans school. Right? So the teacher also had to teach us technically in English, but she was teaching us English in Afrikaans. So you can imagine the combination of so many different things. And this is before I went to boarding school in English school. But what was interesting for me, and I think maybe there's something about class that allowed for a little bit of mobility, is I loved biking, right? So that was one of my favorite things. I would jump on my bike. My mom taught at the Black school. My dad is a policeman. And then there was a library in school. So I loved jumping on my bike and just cycling through all of these different areas because, I was a transition democracy baby, just pre-democracy. But at the time, at least, you were able to move between the different areas until eventually we could buy a house in around 94. And my experience, and I think one of the pivotal or like core memories of living there was actually biking between areas. And I think that is what my poetry has become, which is this. And this is on, so, sometimes you get a flat tire because, like I said, there's only one tarred road and the rest is gravel or dusty. And so it's always risky. My dad taught me how to patch my bike tire because it had to happen frequently. And I have a couple of scars from some adventures because sometimes you'd be playing with the boys and then you guys would like jump, when trying to do tricks and you're like sitting on the bar and you're jumping and trying to run after your bike and jump back on top of it. So I think that experience of cycling on gravel road between different worlds is probably, as I'm speaking to you now, this is actually coming together in this image for me, is that's a lot of what my poetry has been able to do for me, which is this movement and of in between worlds and threading through even things that seem to really be at odds.
Yeah, navigating as well. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. And so, and I'm curious, maybe it's obvious, but because I know that your collection of poetry is called Weeping Becomes a River, is it that river? Is it that riverbed into which a whole lot of tears and emotions and smiles and everything else came as a deluge.
Well done. This is actually the first.
Hey,
First time I've
it's like back in class, right?
Well,
Yeah.
I would just want to let everyone know that, listening, you were a first class student all the way through, so
Yeah.
I'm not surprised.
I'm paying you for that. Yeah.
Yes, I think I actually haven't spoken about that a lot, because I remember I went back a couple of years ago and I took a picture there, actually, in the bridge, because I was really scared to cross the bridge, particularly the walking bridge. So it was this red bridge, really high up. The car bridge was better, but there was this walking bridge that used to terrify me, and I was just scared of heights at the time. I'm a lot better now, but there was this fear, actually, of crossing that particular bridge. So it would be better when it was dry and you can kind of really walk down to the bottom and walk up to the other side. But yes, the river, that in my mind at least, but I release the river in the book to people's interpretation for themselves. Right. But that river is a very significant one in my story and in the book. Yeah, I speak of the Great River in there, and I did some research as well about it. There wasn't a lot, but just thinking about how settlers came into South Africa and would create these outposts and these kind of missionary stations, and Sterkston was one of those places, and then there's a lot of farmland that allowed it to be possible. Yeah, so it's definitely a significant image in my head.
Is there a particular line or a piece or something that came to you first? Perhaps maybe not just in this current collection, but where did that experience of navigating, threading, realizing the canyon and the river, sort of, how did that first germinate in words when it did?
Oh, that'd be difficult to trace.
Okay. Yeah. Or maybe there's a line or there's a particular memory that kind of created one of the first pieces or something. Where did you start?
Within the book itself, or just sort of overall?
Yeah, or let's say even in the book, yeah.
It's probably easier to answer for the book than it is for, all of my writing ever.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So I think it was actually where it emerged was less in the poetry and more in the story portion of the book. So just to explain the structure of the book, it's a poetry collection, but it's woven together with Intsomi, which is a traditional form of Xhosa storytelling. So we don't use the word folklore anymore because of its own connotations, but it is a traditional form that I grew up with, where my mom would tell me these stories that are passed down from generation, that are generally only ever really told by women. It's a multi-generational kind of passing down of oral stories, a little bit of folklore, and they're always improvised, but they are foundational images and tropes that are used. So there are certain characters that, if they appear, this is what to expect. So, if you think about a jackal, for example, the jackal's going to be wily. It's going to be tricking everyone, right? So there are definitely resonances.
There's often animals in it as well.
There's often animals, talking animals, right? But also humans. So unlike, let's say, for example, Greek or Roman mythology, where you have, gods that determine the fate of humans, in the world of Ntsomi, humans determine that for themselves. But magic does exist. The world of magic exists alongside, the natural and physical law. Right. So, for example, this is a world which happens in the story as well. This is one of the tropes that I sort of subsumed into my story, where a monster, for example, can swallow an entire village. And then the people of that whole village lives inside the stomach of this monster or beast. Right. Where there's one where this cannibal, so a cannibal is often the villain in the story. There's a bird. So the cannibal is chasing these kids, and then eventually they run up a tree, and the cannibal sort of hacks at the tree with an axe. And then there's a bird that sings a particular refrain, and that refrain, as the tree's about to fall over, they sing the refrain, and then the tree sort of straightens out again and regrows what has been hacked, right? And then the cannibal catches the bird and eats the bird, but only I think there's a feather that remains. So because there are things that happen in threes, and usually in the third round is when there's some shift within the plot. So music, chants, you can just see how compelling this would be for me. You'll think, oh my gosh, the poetry in all of this. And then the feather of the bird sings the song, right? So we don't question the logic of the magic of the world. It's accepted and often very, very convenient, which makes it
right. Yeah,
makes it
I mean,
easy.
ultimately, there's still moral stories, right? I suppose
Yes,
it's
of
that's
course.
at the foundation. Yeah.
Absolutely. And they're about passing on, family dynamics. A lot of them are about transformation. So generally the protagonist, so it's a lot of coming of age stories. The protagonist will go on some particular journey where they were warned by a parent and then they don't listen and then these things happen and they listen, order is restored. So I wanted to take that and reimagine and think about using that fantastical world to speak about colonial conquest, to speak about my experience of between these worlds. So taking things from the, sort of the natural realm into the realm of insomnia. So yes, the poems are tied together by this fantastical story that moves through them. And actually the river is a big setting for this entire collection within the story. So that was actually the thing that eventually tied the collection together for me. This image of the river. There's bodies of water that move through in different ways. There's transformations that the protagonist goes through as well, physical transformation. And all of this is happening with the backdrop of the river and certain things that happen in the village. Then there's a setting where it moves to the island, and there I play around with the Tempest and Prospero and kind of, borrow some things from the Tempest there to speak about the island. But the island is on the Great River. So I would say once I started writing the story portion of it, that's when the river became the main character in
true fashion in that particular way of storytelling. Yeah, beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a particular piece that comes to mind? Maybe there's a piece about the river itself or something you'd like to share?
There's definitely something I'd like to share. Not about the river, but I think, if I go back to what I said about cycling through different worlds, there's a poem called Inosculation, and that's the one I'd really love to read, which was such an interesting thing when I read up on what inosculation actually is. I don't know if you're familiar with the.
Never heard of that word. Inosculation.
I hadn't either. So just a quick explanation. So it's almost like natural grafting between two trees. So when they grow close enough that they start rubbing against each other, and the bark is actually worn down, and you get the layers actually start to
like interpenetrate. Okay.
Yes, and then they actually pass water and food between each other, and then there'll be scarring around that particular point. So it's just that point of abrasion that creates all the tension eventually becomes this.
Wow, cool. What a cool idea.
I know. But it's completely natural. It's just literally when trees just, unlike the grafting that we do, for example, to get lime or something, that happens naturally. All right. So that's what it is. Inosculation. I wanted to write about my people making peace when love chafes into a lesion. Burning impepo to smudge a space open, a circle of neighbors sipping umvumboti from the same gourd. Spilling animal blood to restore ties between the departed and those who remain. But the ritual of gathering which our parents chose is in the grape juice blood of Jesus, imbibed out of a shot glass. To perform a version of Africanness on the page. Persuade your eye away from this calamity. Children who are defanged to accommodate a colonial tongue are reduced to a mouthful of dentures, reciting clan names to camouflage the disruption, in conversations with extended family who smirk at the prosthesis of English. Now, if I am to yield something authentic, a proverb, an idiom, a description of tradition, I scavenge the dropped fruit fermenting at the base of Google's omniscience. In the days after Udamkulu left us, I watched Otadomngcini unfasten the skin of a sheep with a knife from jaw to tail, in the same backyard where we shot mob, leaving enough room behind the violence of the blade for Utangcini to plunge a fist against the fat and flesh and separate the fur. I am an incomplete slaughter, alive and naked. All my cultures reconcile me to myself through bleeding figures. I compose imibongo with split tongue, umtendeleko omcha, foraging through family history with mother and father for things I can translate into poems. We dispel the shame of loss when we are a forest of trees exposed and grafting at the point of abrasion, willing to turn our vulnerability towards each other.
Beautiful. Turn our vulnerability towards each other.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Live to the point of tears. Yeah. There's something beautiful about hearing the little smatterings of some of the Xhosa words in there. And even though certainly I, and I'm sure a lot of people listening, don't know what those words mean, they add a color to the scene as you're speaking through it, as you're sort of carrying the pace of everything that's going. It's adding to the portrait, the picture in such a beautiful way. And I think it also just speaks to how poetry has to be heard. It has to be performed. It has to be like in the ear in order to really be understood and enjoyed, because it's all about music, isn't it?
That's actually why I made an audiobook, because I thought, and I've had people say, you know what, I've heard you before and I already read your poems in your voice. Can you please make this happen? But really for me, it was actually saying, and I mean, we can go back to, so for us, for example, it's called the tradition, you have imibongo, right? You have oral literature. So that already is there. But you think, even if you go back to the Greeks, for example, right? You started thinking about theater, it is meant to be heard. The rhythm suddenly lifts off the page. Yes, sometimes you can read and see it, but I think once we lift things off the page through voice in particular, something incredibly powerful happens. And my inclusion, and I'm thinking really actually about our conversation and around this question of authenticity and vulnerability, because it's a shifting definition. As with any words, it is possible that as they evolve, sometimes they get weaponized. And I think about, particularly within systems, if you're thinking about in organizations, for example, right, that we're having a conversation, that this conversation around authenticity and vulnerability has been happening for a while. And maybe you'll have these points where there's almost like a peak that it reaches, and then suddenly it becomes something that's, as with any language, co-opted to serve the desires of an organization. And it actually loses its meaning, right? It's possible for those things. Oh, absolutely, right? And so, but for me, so that's what I'm saying. I think the definition, especially in this time of the world, right? So where language itself is seen as threatening again. So I think, and that's obviously when it comes to the rise of fascism, it's inevitable. Books will burn, libraries will be burnt down, museums are erased and rewritten. But when you think about words being outlawed, you obviously start thinking about just how powerful they can be and just how powerful the interpretation of that is. So it's interesting to see even the way in which authenticity and vulnerability themselves, because I've done some work with organizations that I've been hearing a smattering of conversation of, you actually can't be authentic. You can't be fully yourself. You can't actually bring all of who you are into the office space, right? Like into that particular system. Now, I don't work there. I don't work in an office, for example. I don't work in an organization. So that's been quite interesting. That's been quite interesting to me. And I'm coming back to the point about the inclusion of Xhosa in this work. And it was very, very intentional. But it's interesting that it's interesting how words, the definition of words and our interpretation of them. So let me actually share something that happened in a session that I held recently that was very, very interesting. So we were writing a poem together. Part of the work that I do is really to sort of help groups and organizations to figure out their story, but internally, right? What is the story that they are telling themselves? And what story would they like to tell, right? So there's a beautiful way in which the rules of poetry, the freedom, but also some of the restriction of having to be as concise as possible with your words, of having to be very selective with your words, really, I think, slows down the process rather than writing maybe some full report. But there's something about the language of poetry, the process of poetry, that has been quite transformative, because I think to a lot of people, poetry is scary. Poetry, they put up their walls. As soon as you say, they're thinking, oh no, I have been tortured enough in school. I left that behind. I do not. But I think I've been on a mission to show the possibilities and the beauty of using language in not only the metaphoric aspect, surely, because it offers us it helps us to think about the denotative and the connotative, right? So it's like it helps us to think about words as dictionary definition, and then also how we bring our background and bring all of our experiences into how we receive language, into how we understand and interpret it, right? So we had an experience where I can't remember the exact sentence that we put together. So I was writing a pantun with this organization, and there's someone who spoke about vulnerability, right? And so we were saying, so it's also sort of a future commitment that they're making for themselves. And then we actually had a moment where we all had to stop. We just didn't have enough time to really dig into it, because there was a disagreement in the group. Someone said, if we create a space for vulnerability, we'll feel safer. And then someone said, I work with children and children in vulnerable and dangerous spaces. I'm not comfortable with us using the word vulnerable. Can we say healthy vulnerability? And then someone says like, no, I don't know. What do you mean by health? So it was this weird, and completely unexpected. And I love it because you can't anticipate it. Yes. You never know what can happen. Yeah. And really what came out at the end, we just didn't have enough time to dig into it, was that this word vulnerability meant such different things. So you can imagine the room for miscommunication, right? The room for tension, because we think, when we say something, we think and assume that others understand. Right. So they understand vulnerability as risk, as physical risk, because they work with children in dangerous
and undue risk.
Exactly. Yeah. So and I remember saying to them, the poem that we write at the end of this doesn't really matter in the grade. What matters is the process that we're going through. Yeah. Actually helps us to really now exactly unearth those moments. So I always say process, not product, to the point where I don't consider any of my writings as finished ever. Of course. Yeah. Right? Yeah. I always say anything I've published is because an editor just wrested from my hands. I was like, absolutely. Like, listen, okay. Yeah. So that's the only reason there.
There's so much there that I would love to unpack and fully. Yeah, it's very dense what you're saying. I do love the idea of vulnerability and work with it. I also work with it in different groups, often in business settings as well. And it's a difficult, contentious word, because sometimes common knowledge is maybe not always so common. We do have different ways of defining words, defining how we feel about certain words, and how they invent ideas. And they create ideas and they stick there, but words aren't only defined by the dictionary. Sometimes they're defined by trauma or place or other experiences that we might not even know even ourselves. We're not even aware of what those influences are a lot of the time. They run underground, but parallel at the same time. So it's crazy. A vulnerability also, I think, comes from the Latin vulna, which means a wound. And that also just like, wow, that gives it such a sort of a color on the palette for how to approach it and how to think about it, and why it's sensitive. Yeah,
I love that Rumi quote. Not not to be pretentious or anything, but because I actually just used it recently. But
walk around with Rumi quotes. I love it.
You know what? It's great. I wish it's the only one.
There's always a time.
I promise. It's because I actually wrote it into something recently.
Nice.
But it says the wound is where the light enters.
Yeah, beautiful. Another one.
And that's kind of my framing as well. As like be afraid of the messy part, because it's really important. Yep. And even understanding that we need to release meaning, because you can put together your mission statement, you can put together your purpose and your vision, whatever, as an organization, for example. And it's up to the people that read, that receive that on the other end, that it may not be received the way. And we're seeing this a lot, I think, with having companies on social media and actually running their social media like people, like they're right. Actually like they're actually sort of autonomous beings, and how sometimes can work really well, and then other times it absolutely leads to some kind of disaster. But those are for me the thrilling parts of communication, of language, and poetry in particular, because done well, it's already so dense and with meaning, but it's meant to open things up for me. I always feel a discomfort when language closes. I mean, which happens with definition, right?
Yeah, precisely. And I think a lot of the time, just because of other incentives like efficiency and productivity and making things work, making, as little loss of money as possible, various different incentives, which make sense in and of themselves. It also means that the language and the communication style has to suit that, which means often it needs to be neutral. It needs to limit emotionality and unpredictability. It has to be the vehicle for what it needs to accomplish, right? But then, of course, it has its effects, which is what we're discussing. Yeah, which is reducing that willingness to be vulnerable, ultimately.
That's the process that matters.
Yeah.
Because, as I said, whatever we produce doesn't really matter. One of the, some of the beautiful moments that we've had, I'm just thinking of a recent one, was so like I said earlier, people are scared of poetry with good reason. I think the way it's taught in schools generally is sad. So there's a wall that comes up. So when you tell a group of executives, this has happened to me, okay, we're going to write a poem together, you can feel the temperature drop in the
yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay. And these are people that handle maybe, millions of dollars and thousands of people. And
but still, it's unfamiliar.
40 of them in a room, you say, we're going to write a poem together, and you can just, whatever trauma they have, just start flashing before their eyes.
Yeah.
But so what I done was we played some drama games just to kind of loosen them up. Just realize what happens, because the key component is the together. It's the right together.
The trust
right.
building.
So as soon as that clicks, exactly. As soon as that clicks, you see something shift. And so in this particular one that I designed, we did they wrote stanzas, I think, so groups of 5, and they would write a stanza for this whole poem that we're going to put together. And then you give them the prompts and the framing for how to do that. And then when you have enough time, it's beautiful, because then you can actually process that a little bit longer, give them maybe a new challenge and say, okay, you're going to write this, but you're not allowed to use the word the. So putting all these little blocks that actually push them a little bit further. But what was interesting was the kind of so now in the debrief and having this conversation, thinking it was that shift that happened for them from moving from an individual, especially in leadership, where you're at the top, there's kind of this apex, and you're at the top, and you generally, the decisions trickle down and so on. It was this kind of that happened in structure that actually allowed a lot more collaboration, that allowed for people to ask help and to also start understanding the strengths and where some people, and then we started discovering, oh wait, this person has been writing poetry, but they've never had a space to actually share and so on. And so, everyone, then it shifted that particular dynamic for that group and other. So it was, and gosh, some really amazing things have happened.
Yeah, I can believe it.
It's no different than when I work with a group of 10-year-olds.
Right. Yeah. Except the poetry's better. Yeah. Yeah.
It really isn't. I mean, except maybe the difference with 10-year-olds is they throw themselves into it from the get.
Right. I'd imagine.
They just don't hold back. Right.
Yeah.
But once you get them over that particular hurdle, something, for me, if I were to say there's one thing that matters about what I do, is that I think of language as opening things up rather than shutting them down. And when people just unclench or they just open their hands up a little bit, magic.
Yes. Now the body shows that sometimes first, most of the time first, as well as that perturbation, that there's a breakthrough occurring, and sometimes it happens quietly and softly. I want to hear more about how I'm super interested and love as a tool the voice, whether it's to sing, whether it's to be urgent, to be wise, be itself, whatever it does. The voice as an instrument, and I want to hear a bit more about how you approach using your voice in particular as an instrument, because it's part of what you deliver, ultimately what gets performed. And how the voice can also be its own therapy. So
the voice is, I was speaking to someone about embodiment, I think it was maybe 2 days ago, and this agreement that the voice is part of the body, how one expresses themselves, because of the audiobook in particular. What happens when you don't have gestures, when you don't have expressions, when you don't have all of those other tools in the body, and you only have the voice. There's something to be said about how our voices are affected by trauma, for one, but also other certain restrictions, right? Just the very idea of releasing your voice, or children should be seen and not heard, whatever formative things you might have had, how they affect how much we allow ourselves to speak, the number of times if you want to say something and you want to feel something. I mean, you feel something, you want to say it, but you can't express it. You want to, and again, if we go back to maybe this question of authenticity or vulnerability in organization or in any kind of grouping, really, the voice plays a particular role, I think, in supporting a persona, right? So whether how we show up. So whether it's keeping quiet, whether it's being all exuberant and effervescent and all of these things. So I think the voice actually plays a lot in whatever character we play. For me, I found, actually it's happened in rehearsal today, I find that I use the voice, and it's a response to my environment in performance, right? So there are ways in which I can listen, I can see the audience or feel them, and I can use my voice to take them where I want to go. And if I feel like we're not moving together in the same direction, playing with pitch, playing with pace, and because for me the silence is imperative. Silence as a performer is always full of something, right? Which always makes radio very interesting, because when I'm ready thinking, you want to think about a question, but you can't actually just be quiet. They have to fill up the space all the time.
Yeah.
It's like a big boogeyman. It's dead air on radio, and you can put it in a host space and think. So I always think, so if I get a question and I'm like, oh, that's very interesting, right? That really takes some thinking, and I'm actually using that time. So I have to articulate what I'm doing. I'm using that time to think what I say. So I find the voice allows me to be a conductor of like emotions, right? And so whether it's the kind of flair, it's the silence that I'll hold, it's the pitch, it's the volume, it's whatever pacing. I find that it kind of drives certain things if used powerfully, but there's also the content of what it is that you're saying. I think for a poet in particular, you can have the best vocal technique, and if you just have nothing great to say. So it's interesting that you're asking that question, because for me, my response, I almost think even in rehearsal, I'm more likely to think about physical blocking, but the voice is really determined in the moment for me, in the moment of what's happening, in terms of what I'll do. And then the other side of think about voice metaphorically, saying, what kind of work do I do? What kind of collaborations do I do? Who do I align with in my work? And I think that's where, when I think about my voice as Siphokazi, that's where I put a lot of thought into who do I work with, who do I not work with. Again, it's like, is there alignment is in voice? It's like, what are we saying? What are we putting out into the world? What are we contributing to the conversation? And what the impact will be. What the impact will be as a result.
It's a great distinction, because the voice isn't just a sound, but it's a signature too. It's where you sign your signature and what that says about you and what that voice, how it speaks for you in that way, which I think is such an important thing for everyone, obviously, on the planet. But I suppose also just coming back to some of the experiences I've also had in organizations where there's kind of an attention being overpaid on the sort of style rather than the substance on certain things. And acknowledging the quality of a voice in that way, I think, is helpful in being able to sort of spot that and go, oh, okay, maybe there's another way to use the voice. Maybe there's a different voice that should be speaking. Yeah. How do you? I'm curious on how you write. Do you write by speaking it out, or sort of almost before, saying the words like Wordsworth, sort of walking around and just this phrase came to me, or do you sit down at a desk and handwrite or type it out? What comes through for you when you're creating all this?
Most of the time, it's the sitting down, but writing. So there's the general writing that starts with, say a writer starts by being a reader, but I found that, so I can start with opening my Word document, but I can know when I'm not ready. So there's actually thinking. A lot of my writing happens in thinking. I've written things while driving where, see something and then kind of like your mind is busy crafting something together. But I've especially with creating a bigger body of work, rather than, for example, an individual poem here, a commission here, a commission there. But when you're trying to put together a whole body of work,
right,
that system is you know what I mean? So I found that I step away from the laptop a lot. When I'm not ready, I can get to the page and I'm like, I haven't thought this through enough. I haven't actually done the mental work, so I can write in my head while doing the dishes. And then eventually something will click. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I'll come back. And then I think, oh, all right. And I write, okay, now I need to go back. I need to go live. I need to go do stuff. I need to go. So it is actually.
I need to go live. I like that.
So it's a very embodied process in that sense as well.
Yeah,
but
totally.
I'm like, I get there. I'm just, sort of hands hovering over the keyboard. I'm just like, nah, it's too soon.
You need a typewriter. That's why.
Oh, for the. Oh no, I'd lose my mind. Well, actually, handwriting is the alternative. Because again, it's about slowing that process down, about slowing them. Think more when you don't just have backspace.
That's true. Yeah,
your own process, because scratching out versus deleting, it's very, very different. So I love that as well.
Beautiful. Wow. I've loved every minute of our conversation, and I really hope we'll get another chance to have more of it, because it's nice to feel like, even though we didn't really know each other so well beyond, that experience all those years ago at university, it feels like you and I have a lot in common, and would love that. So you're going to play us out now with a recording from your new book, from your poetry collection, Weeping Becomes a River. Talk to us about what we're going to hear in a few moments.
Right. So this is an extract from the Ins Omi portion of Weeping Becomes a River, which, as I mentioned earlier, is belongs to this oral tradition of Siphokazi storytelling. And this is my modern take on that tradition, which I hope the listeners will enjoy and really appreciate the power of the voice.
Wonderful. Thank you. I've so enjoyed chatting to you. I hope we get to do it again. I hope we get to work together. Let's do something. Let's do something cool.
Looking at the time, and I'm like, what?
I know. Yeah, it's a good sign.
Yeah, there's actually
wonderful. You're fabulous.
Thanks so much, Alex. I appreciate it. It's actually really cool to do something together.
Yeah, wonderful. Watch out, world. Thank you. Thanks for being on the Humble Mind podcast, and good luck for tonight.
Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure. We'll chat soon.
Kwathi ke kaloku ngantsomi. The village. A woman gave birth one night in a village. In those days, women delivered their offspring quickly. But this child was so stubborn that she took a week to make her appearance. The village women who assisted in the birthing hut noticed strange unfoldings during the labor. Firstly, the womb waters flowed from mother in a stream that went out of the doorway. The youngest woman was sent to follow and see where the waters led, and she returned to report that the stream had reached the banks of the great river and disappeared. The girl then emerged with a cry, which sounded more like a lamenting widow than a newborn. But what frosted the hearts of the women with fear was the absence of an umbilical cord. Those with delicate knees were ready to escape the hut, but they paused at the warning of grandmother, who reminded them that women must protect each other's secrets for their survival. And so, they cast their wisdom into the hearth, contemplating how they could fulfill birthing rituals ngaphandle kwenkaba. Finally, they agreed to make an incision on the baby's navel with a stalk of grass and to let it bleed over a slab of mimosa bark. They hoped it would eventually heal to look like any other navel scar to the villagers. The bark was buried where mother had labored, and she was allowed to wash herself and the girl over the spot. The women then returned to their homes, carrying the silence of that night. Back in the hut, the girl would not cease her crying. Yet she refused mother's milk. As midnight stretched its limbs over the homestead, her tears were interrupted by Ikhalanga landing in the doorway. Its wings and silhouette cast a shadow into the hut. "Whose child is this, whose cry could wake the dead?" he inquired, peering at the infant. "Lusana lwam," replied mother, clutching her daughter closer as if to ward off death, which often follows a visitation yeKhalanga. "Ulambile kodwa wala ibele." This strange thing disturbs the waters with her tears, and she will trouble the land too if you do not amend the events of this night. Reaching deep into his feathers, he pulled out a clay pot and gave it to mother. "Here, rub this paste on her navel every day after bathing, and sing this song while you do. But do not let anyone hear you." "Uvelaphi lo iyo iyo, uzelwe ngenankaba iyo iyo. Kwazibani kwazuni na, uthi ngowam lo, ngegazi namanzi nomoya. Uthi ngowam lo, ngegazi namanzi nomoya. Wenu ngowam iyo iyo, wenu ngowam iyo iyo." Over time, her scar will change appearance, and even the women who were here will doubt what their eyes witnessed tonight. Do this until the girl turns 7, and the change will be permanent. Do not let anyone besides you, your mother, and your husband touch this paste. And on her 7th birthday, all of you will lose the memory of this ritual. Take care of this pot. If it breaks, what will unfold can never be undone. Ikhalanga took off without another word for the stunned women.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Humble Mind. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're curious to take a look at our community, if you're not a member, you're missing out. Make sure you head to humblemind.co to check out more and to see what we're up to. I look forward to seeing you there. Until next time.